Hello YouTube. So this week's project on this 2000 H1 soft top is going to be a full AutoMeter gauge conversion. So we're going to get rid of all the old gauges. Even going to do the CTIS gauge. Now AutoMeter didn't make a dual display pressure gauge like the factory unit, so I found these units one from Glow Shift and one from Pro Sport. I don't know which one I'm going to use yet, but we'll get into that one later. What I like about the AutoMeter gauges is they're all still made in the United States. Everything's American made, everything from the dials, the gauges, the electronics, everything. So on this speedometer, this is the 2688 160 mile an hour one. It's programmable, and if you buy this from AutoMeter, you can have them preload your current mileage onto the odometer. That way you can just pick up where you left off. You could be correct and have all the accurate mileage on your truck rather than starting from zero. And it's really easy to program. You push the button a couple times, you drive 2 miles, you push the button again, and you're done. So it'll count the pulses while you're driving. You won't show mileage down here. It'll start counting the pulses off of your digital ratio adapter that's in your truck. And for the H1, it's 128,000 pulses per mile. So you can drive this thing till you get right to 256,000 pulses and push that button and you will be perfectly dialed in. So the tachometer, this is a conventional tach. It's not a diesel tach. This is a 2891 6,000 RPM. You have to buy for 2 5/8 from AutoMeter. You have to buy the pedestal mount one. We're not going to use that. It has a little can that comes off the back here with that screw. You can even use that can as a clamp to bolt it into your bezel. And we'll see if that's going to work later. And you don't have to buy a diesel tach. I found this little gadget. I'm going to show it to you later. If you buy the diesel tach from AutoMeter, they give you this little pickup that you strap to your alternator with a hose clamp. And to me, that's just hokey. I didn't want that, so I found this other gadget. We'll get into that later. That way you can use any tach you want in your truck. It doesn't have to be a diesel tach. So the other gauge is just your regular volt gauge, oil pressure. The new clock from AutoMeter is pretty cool. You got 2 buttons to program the up and down. One button is 1 minute, or you can push it and hold it, and you can dial up your time real fast. It's nicer because you know, if you've got that little pin sticking out of your clock, the knob's gone, and you can, yeah, that's a pain in the butt to try to set the time. Water temp, and then fuel. So fuel, I went with a 2656. This is a full sweep servo motor gauge, and I like this one because it has a lot of pre-programmed resistance settings in it for different vehicles, but it's also custom programmable. So you can dial it into the Hummer fuel setting unit. So the one in the truck is you know, it's 19.3 ohms on empty and like 268 ohms on full. And this one is settable from like 0 to 280 ohms. So you can dial this gauge in perfectly to match the setting unit that's in your truck. And plus you get the full sweep, so you get much better resolution rather than just like the little windshield wiper gauge. So you can see the difference there. And I'm also doing the LED conversion. I'm going to go with the ambers. These are a lot brighter than the little incandescent bulbs that come with these. They come with a little red and a green boot that goes over the bulb if you want to change the color, but it makes it a lot dimmer. These are pretty bright. They should look pretty nice in there. They pop into all these gauges, and they are polarity specific. They go in both ways, but if you don't have it in the right way, it won't come on. So you want to check, make sure you got them put in it correctly, and wire these gauges up and light them up before you install them, or you could be pulling it out again. So anyway, I think I'm going to start with the speedometer. I'm going to do that one first. And there's a couple ways in the truck they say you can get the speedometer out. Actually, the manual says to drop your lower panel here and drop your steering column and reach up under there and loosen those two little nuts on the back side. But to get through here, to get that cross bolt out to drop your steering column, that bolt's kind of a pain in the butt to get to. So I think it's going to be a lot easier to pull off the crash pad here and take the screws out from around the dashboard or the instrument bezel, and I think all I need to be able to do is just roll it forward so I can reach in behind there and get those two nuts off. So we're going to do that one first, and we'll come back when I start getting some of this disassembled and we get that first gauge put in. So that actually came out pretty easy. So here's the stock speedo, and then here's the new one, and there's a little jumper harness that jumps into the main wiring harness here, and it looks like it has the same kind of terminals on here, just 1/4 inch spade push connect. So I'll probably just be able to get the end of this plug out, get these connectors out of here, and just plug these directly into the speedometer one at a time. So that makes it really nice. So that'll go in real easy. The dash was pretty easy to get out. There's you take your tack bezel out, and there's a screw inside there. There's 2 bolts under here that you take one out of here, and then you've got a couple on the side over here, and then this whole thing just pulls forward, and you can get your hand in here pretty easily. If you have any burned out bulbs or you're not sure on these displays, if you have these displays, this is a 2000, they are just on one connector, takes the whole thing out. So if you have anything you want to do inside these displays for these indicator lights, now would be the time to do it. So we'll go ahead and put it all back together and get this wired up, and then we'll go on to the next gauge. So that was about the easiest thing ever. I've got the wiring diagram here from the H1 service manual. It tells you where all the colors go for all the gauges in case you get lost. And I got this connector off the end of this little pigtail, and I did put a little heat shrink on them because they're just big exposed contacts and don't need anything touching in there. They're kind of close together. But this was about the easiest thing ever. This is going to be plugged right back into the factory harness, and all ready to set it up and program it. So we'll put that back in, put the dash back together, and then we'll see about getting this thing calibrated. So I got the tack and the clock mounted in the bezel. It turned out pretty good. So I wasn't able to use the can that came off the back of the tack. If you had a flat bezel like the stock bezel, this would probably work great for putting on the back side of that little plastic trim piece to hold that tack in. But unfortunately, I've got this giant aluminum wedge here. It's at an angle all the way down, and I counterbored those gauges into there, and I made notches here for the factory clamps for the old gauges. But so this wasn't going to work. I could have cut this up and made it fit down inside the slots here, and also with this one I probably could have cut this one up and got it to where those little fingers would go down inside the little recess I have right there. But I ended up just getting some aluminum and cutting some brackets and screwing it in. There's a post here in the center that this one screws into, draws it up, and I went ahead and put a Delphi connector on the end. These are great weather pack connectors. And then on the clock, for some reason AutoMeter decided to do a little plug on this clock instead of the 2 little posts. But they actually put the posts in, but they don't go anywhere inside the clock. So this is actually going to be a nice little junction block or a terminal block for the factory eyelets that are in the truck. So I'm just going to put them underneath those nuts, screw them down, and then that should work. And the light, ironically, the light is part of the wiring harness under the dash, and it is the same as the stock gauge. So I put the LED bulb in there, and that's just going to pop in. All right, so where does all this go? So let me go ahead and set the camera up inside the truck, and you can see how we're going to make this regular gas tack work in a diesel engine. Alright, so we're back in the truck, and I got this plugged in. So here's the Delphi connector. Took the 3 wires that came from the factory harness and round those up, and then I took the signal wire and I found this guy right here. So this is made by Dakota Digital. It's an SGI-100BT, and it is a tachometer speedometer interface, and you can program this thing to do anything with anything. It will turn any signal into any other signal, and it will give you a 12 volt square wave pulse output for a conventional tach. Super easy to install. Ignition, ground, and then all you do is you interrupt intersect your tach wire. You got your tach in, your tach out. It's down here on the conventional side, not the diesel side, and then you just run that back up. And what's nice about this is it tucks down. There's a spot right down behind here where this thing just tucks down perfectly down inside there, and so that gets hidden. And there's a million buttons that you can push on here to change the settings. There's a display right here, and it comes with a whole list of programming codes, but there's an easier way. I'm going to show you that in a second. And here is the LED light that goes into the back of the clock. Here I've got the 12 volts positive and ground for the clock, and actually I don't know what this connector is for. It was just back in there, probably some accessory that I don't have. But anyway, I'm going to put all this back together, and then we're going to start the truck, and I'm going to show you how to set this up. Okay, I got the engine running here, so it's going to be a little bit noisy. So on this little decoder digital, this SG100BT, if you didn't pick up on it, the BT stands for Bluetooth. So here is your interface right here. You just download the app, and you don't even need to get to the unit to set it up. So the contrast here is not going to be real good. Let me try shutting this light off. Hold on. Alright, so once you got everything hooked up and running and installed, I've got the engine running right now, so it's probably a little bit noisy. I've got my scanner right here. I'm reading about 680 RPM, and I come over to my tach and I'm reading right about 680, 700 RPM. So you go into the app, and you've got your setup screen right here. You go into setup, and you go into tach. You select that, and on this screen you can do just about everything. You've got cycle counts for the input, you got cycle counts for the output. You can do a calibration value adjust right here, and between these numbers right here you can actually just dial this tach in perfectly, you know, to what it says is coming off the computer right here at 680 RPM. So great little setup, and works real fast. You can do calibrations on speedometers if you have a different type of speedometer, but this one right here, it has its own calibration setup in it, so that worked out really well. Anyway, last thing to do, I kind of started on the temperature gauge here, and I got to do the fuel gauge, and we'll get that calibrated, and we'll put those in next. Alright, so I got this servo motor fuel gauge calibrated. What you have to do to get into calibration mode is when you set it up, you have to hook up this momentary switch here and push this button a couple times. When you're all done with this, you just cut these ends off and tape the wires off and stow them. You don't need them anymore. And I just went ahead and put in a quickie on-off switch because it takes a second for my power supply to actually warm up and click in. So anyway, I had an extra fuel sending unit laying around. So right now I've got it into the full position, and when you turn it over and empty the tank, it starts to drain on the gauge, which you can see, but it moves really, really slow. I mean, it moves like molasses, but it'll count all the way down to empty. And I thought, wow, is it only, you know, if you stop for gas, is it going to take forever for this gauge to come up? But I found out that right now I'm on an empty tank, so if I take power off from the vehicle, it just stops where it is. And then if I had to stop for gas or something, and when you reinitialize, it just goes right to where the sending unit is. So that'll be great when you're filling up. You won't have to wait like 3 minutes for that thing to scale all the way across. So that's working good. And now I got to just button up all these wires, and this one's ready to install. And then last will be the temperature sending unit, which I think I'm going to have a challenge finding the wires from the Duramax harness to get to this gauge. But we'll come back when we get that far. Okay, so this is the voltmeter and the oil pressure gauge. And another thing I like about the AutoMeter gauges is they give you quick terminals on the back where you can just plug in some spade terminals. But they also give you a threaded connection. So there's a threaded post there. So if you buy some 4mm nuts and washers, you can use the factory harness just the way it comes off the other gauges. You might have to change a little bit on the lights, but this gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot quicker installation by using the little ring terminals on the threaded post there, instead of cutting up your entire harness to modify it. So that's another little convenience, and we'll get these put in and see what it looks like. I bought 2 of these gauges for my CTIS, and one is a glow shift gauge and one is a Pro Sport gauge, and I've got them both kind of mocked up here on the bench. I've got this tank that has 50 psi in it exactly, and I completely trust the gauge that is up on top here. This is pretty accurate, and then this gauge goes into this tank. I got 50 pounds in it, and then I kind of have everything just kind of manifolded together right here, so everything's on the same air source. And if you look at these gauges, one of them is reading, you know, right at 47, 48. It's pretty close on the readings, and then that's the Pro Sport, and then this glow shift gauge here. This one you can kind of go through and you can pick 7 different colors, and you know, they're a couple pounds off. But what I don't like about this gauge is if you view it at a certain angle, and let me shut the light off here. I kind of like the ability to change colors, but depending on what angle you look at, this thing completely like fades out. I mean, you can see that it just, you know, there's areas in there where you can't read it anymore, and I'm afraid I'm going to be at that angle right there in the truck, and then I'm going to be moving my head all over the place, and it's just not going to be legible. So I'm actually not happy with either one of these gauges. There's the amber, and you can see right there, if you get just that right sweet spot, the resolution just kind of drops out. When I bought this Pro Sport gauge, the advertisement said amber, so I thought that was going to be pretty cool. And I get it, and it's not amber at all, it's bright red. But this one here, it looks like the sensors are pretty close. They're a couple pounds low, but no matter what angle you put that on, you can still see it. But for bottom line is, I'm not going to be using either one of these gauges. I actually went out and found one from Dakota Digital where you can program the display on it, and it's a vacuum fluorescent display. It's kind of a teal color, so I think I'm going to be a lot happier with that. But anyway, these are going to go back, and like I said, I don't like either one, and they're just not worthy of the project I'm doing here. So anyway, we'll get the other one in here in a couple days, and then we'll go from there. All right, so this is the Dakota Digital gauge, and I like this a lot. It's got a vacuum fluorescent display. I ordered this one in the teal color instead of the blue color, and the sensors seem to be a lot more accurate. I mean, they're within a pound of each other. This one keeps bouncing back to where it's 48 and 48. So this gauge is pretty cool. It comes with this bus interface module, and you can actually connect 5 pressure sensors to this module. And when you do that, it automatically selects the screen for you, and then you can go in there and program further from that. So just for front and rear, which is all I need, it's going to be great to hook this up. Also, the pressure sensors are a lot smaller than those bulky ones that came with the Glow Shift and the Pro Sport gauge. And I'm going to tuck these up behind the dash. I could run these out and screw them right into the CTIS manifold, but I'm not going to. And let me show you why real quick. Get the camera off the pod here. And if you've ever worked on your CTIS system, there is the airline that comes off the back of the manifold here. And if you haven't swapped out that factory one that has like a T with a red plug in it, those things are notorious for leaking. So, you know, get rid of that. Put in the updated, just a single elbow one. It's a swivel, so you can position it where you want. But in this airline is this little tiny orifice right here. There's only inside this fitting, there's only like about a 10,000ths hole that goes through, and then this line goes up through the dash to the gauge, and the rear one's down in here. It does about the same thing. Now what that does is when your compressor is stroking up and down, you don't want the needle on your gauge just doing this while, you know, every time the compressor comes to the top. So what this does is kind of like a buffer or an attenuator, and it takes that surge out, so your gauge action is a lot smoother when your pressure is going up. So I want to leave that intact, and I'm going to mount those pressure sensors behind the dash and just tuck them right behind the gauge, and I'll probably be able to cut some of that 15-foot cable off of there. That cable is crazy long that came with these sensors, but I'll knock these down, and that way I can just get rid of some of this wire, and it should be a pretty nice fit. You also get the blue wire that comes out of this harness, so if you touch that to 12 volts, it will dim that gauge for you. In case you want to hook that up to your headlight wire, you can dim that for nighttime. And about ready to put all this back together. Now, earlier in the video, I did a little stint on this servo motor fuel gauge, and if you remember when I said this thing is like molasses when it goes from when you flip your sending unit over, it takes like 4 or 5 minutes for this thing to travel back to the empty from the full, or from the full to the empty. And it's great if you have a single gauge on your truck or a single tank on your truck, but if you have dual tanks and you have one that's full and one's kind of empty and you want to flip the switch to check your fuel level, it will take forever for this to go to where it needs to go. So it's it's really slow, and I could have put a switch. Now if you kill the ignition switch and then turn it back on, this will go right to where it's supposed to instantly. But if you're driving down the road, you're not going to be able to do that. I thought about putting in a little single button kill switch that kills the power just to this gauge, and then when I release it, it reinitializes and goes to the tank. And I thought, yeah, that's not right, that's not convenient. So basically I took that gauge back out, and I went and just got the other one, the other version. I tried this out on the sending unit. It's real fast to respond. If you flip your sending unit up and down, it goes right where it's supposed to in a hurry. So this is an air core gauge, like most of the AutoMeters are, and this one was the servo drive, and it takes forever for it to process a signal internally. So I'm going to ditch that one, go to this one, and we'll get all that hooked up. So these are the last two gauges I need to put in, and then we'll wrap this thing up here and see what it looks like when it's all finished. Just something I want to add real quick. So I got these sensor cables shortened up, and I was able to save from having to stuff all this wire. I mean, there's probably 35 feet of wire here that I don't have to stuff behind the dash. So that's going to go away. But when I do wiring, or like if anybody does wiring on their vehicle, I can't stand crimp connectors. So every single one of my terminations are soldered and heat shrink. That way, they take up less space. There's no chance it's going to vibrate apart. It doesn't look stupid. Crimp connectors are the absolute worst. And on wires that go under screw terminals, like this thing right here, I have these old ferrules, this ferrule kit. I mean, these things are super cheap. They make them in a ton of different sizes. And I think I paid like, $15 for a crimp tool. So what that does is it puts a real nice ferrule on the end of your wire. So if you're landing a bare wire or something, it's not going to get all frayed out like these are right here. When I had this thing, set up to test with, these putting wires under they just, the strands break off. It's just horrible. This is a really sound installation right here, and anytime you got to do that. So just thought I'd pass that on. Take your time, do the wiring right, and it's going to last forever, and it's not going to fall apart on you. Okay, so finally we are at the end of the video. Everything is in, everything's done, got it all buttoned up, everything's wired. This is what the finished product looks like. I do like the amber gauges as opposed to the old green ones. I didn't really care for the red or the blue. These are all the LED light upgrades. And there's the tach, there's the cool clock down there. And down here is that Dakota Digital CTAS gauge. And I'm going to show you how that works real quick. So I turn the ignition on, it comes on. And I don't know how much that you can see, but when you run up the compressor, it's real smooth. So there's 43 psi on the rear, and then it just keeps climbing up, really smooth. It doesn't jump around at all, so that's working out really well. So that is the end of that. And unfortunately, I would love to show you guys the gauges with the engine running, but last time I took this out, I grenaded my turbo, so I can't even start this thing right now. So from Calibrated Power, part of Duramax Tuner, this is my new Stealth 64 right here. And guess what my next project is? So I don't know if the body's going to come off or we're going to go through the doghouse to do this, but that is my next video. This is a nice upgraded turbo. Calibrated Power does a real nice job, and this should add about 120 rear wheel horsepower according to the specs. But this is going to my LBZ Duramax. This is not going on a 6.5 turbo diesel. Don't know if I'm going to do a video on this or not, but anyway, that's my next project. Hopefully I get this thing back on the road soon. And that's about the end of the video. So I hope you got some information out of this, and thanks for watching.